There's a very strange, almost unsettling quirk about human psychology.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
Well, you can walk past a crack in your living room wall every single day.
Right.
And the very first time you notice it, you're totally alarmed. Your brain just sounds the alarm like, I need to call a foundation specialist right now. The house is settling. This is an absolute disaster.
Right. You're in full panic mode.
Exactly.
Uh,
But then you get busy, so you put it off.
Yeah.
And the second time you see it, the panic is kind of gone, and you just think, oh, I'll put some spackle on that this weekend.
Which you definitely don't do.
Obviously not. A month later, instead of fixing it, you just, slide potted plant in front of it to hide it. And a year later, you literally do not even see the crack anymore. It has just become this permanent part of the architecture of your life.
That is so true. It's the psychological phenomenon of normalizing brokenness. And it is incredibly powerful. As human beings, we just have this astonishing capacity to adapt to our environment, even when that environment is quite literally falling apart.
I mean, we just get used to the rubble.
We do. Our brains are wired for efficiency. So rather than sustaining a constant state of alarm, which is exhausting, we learn the new angle of the floor, we adjust our posture, and we stop noticing the damage altogether.
And that profound human tendency to just accept the rubble, that is the focal point of what we are unpacking today. So I want to pose a question to you right out of the gate. Where are the cracks in your community or, even in your own family that you have simply learned to walk past?
That is a heavy question to start with, but it's exactly where we need to be.
Yeah, we are looking at week 1 of Pastor Floren's new sermon series at Agape Community Church. The series is called The Calling, Rise and Rebuild from Rubble to Renewal. It is this amazing 12-part journey anchored in the Old Testament book of Nehemiah.
It's going to be such a foundational series.
It really is. But before we jump into the history, which is honestly, it's fascinating, I want you to grab your Bible or just open the app on your phone and pause this audio right now. Read Nehemiah chapter 1, verses 1 through 11.
And use the NIV if you have it, but honestly, any version works just fine.
Right. Once you've read those 11 verses, hit play, and we will dive into the deep end.
And while you're pulling that up, it is probably worth mentioning how this deep dive actually fits into the larger picture of your apprenticeship to Jesus. This audio is part of a 3-tier approach to Pastor Floren's teaching.
Yeah, we really want to hit this from all angles.
Exactly. First, there is the live Sunday sermon, which is preached dynamically for the gathered church in the room. Second, there is the fuller midweek YouTube video, which you can use to slow down, explore the text for greater depth, take some notes.
And then third, there's this deep dive and your local apprenticeship groups. And full disclosure, this deep dive was developed with a bit of AI assistance, but it has been fully reviewed by Pastor Floren to make sure it aligns with everything Agape stands for.
Right, so the idea is preached for the room, explored for depth, and discussed for apprenticeship. Your local groups are where this message is actually processed in community and applied to everyday obedience.
All right, assuming you have unpaused us and you've read the text, we need to set the scene. The year is 445 BCE. The location is the citadel of Susa. And the contrast between Nehemiah's physical surroundings and his emotional state in this passage is just jarring.
Oh, it's day and night.
Right. He's super comfortable, but the news he gets completely wrecks him. So help us wrap our heads around the environment he is sitting in. Because Susa wasn't just some, random, dusty desert outpost, right?
Not at all. If you want to understand the shock to Nehemiah's system, you really have to understand Susa. This was the cosmopolitan, absolute nerve center of the Persian Empire under King Artaxerxes I.
So we're talking serious wealth.
Unbelievable wealth. Susa was a winter capital, massive monumental architecture, soaring stone columns, glazed brick palaces, and intense high-stakes political power. The Persian Empire was a global superpower, and Susa was the room where it happened, and Nehemiah is right in the middle of it.
Serving as the cupbearer to the king. But wait, I need to stop you there because we have to clarify this cupbearer title. When I grew up hearing this story in Sunday school, my mental image of a cupbearer was essentially a glorified waiter.
Right, like a guy with a towel draped over his arm.
Exactly, just some guy whose only job was to pour the king a glass of Pinot Noir. But looking at the historical context, that doesn't seem to capture the weight of the role at all.
Yeah.
Wasn't he functioning much more like a modern chief of staff or like a national security advisor?
That is a vastly more accurate way to look at it. In the Achaemenid court, the cupbearer was an elite, top-tier official. Think about the politics of an ancient empire. Royal assassination by poisoning wasn't a trope.
It was an everyday
A
threat.
highly common everyday threat. So the person who poured and tasted the king's drink had to be someone of unimpeachable character, deep loyalty, and profound situational awareness. Yeah, and beyond just tasting wine, the cupbearer managed access to the king. He was a confidant. He understood the nuances of court etiquette, diplomacy, and the moods of the most powerful man on the planet. Nehemiah is a very high-level executive.
Okay, so picture this. Nehemiah is living in the lap of absolute luxury. He's wielding serious political influence. He's physically safe. But then his brother Hanani arrives with some men from Judah. And they haven't just copped over from the next town.
No, not at all.
Jerusalem is something like 800 miles away from Susa. That is a grueling journey that would have taken weeks, if not months. And when they finally arrive, Nehemiah interrogates them about the state of this ruined city and the Jewish remnant living there.
And the news is not good.
No. When he hears the walls are broken down and the gates are burned, he just collapses. And I guess my question is, if he has all this power and comfort in Susa, why is he so emotionally tethered to a pile of rubble 800 miles away?
That tension points right to the core of our own human condition. And this actually helps answer our second foundational question for this study, which is, what does this passage reveal about humanity?
Yeah, our condition, our struggles.
Exactly. Hanani brings an honest report from the field, and it completely shatters Nehemiah's curated comfort. He tells him the walls of Jerusalem are broken down. Now, to a modern ear, broken walls sound like a municipal infrastructure problem.
Right, like a pothole that needs fixing.
Yeah, but in the ancient Near East, walls were not just decorative masonry. They weren't just property lines. Walls meant civic dignity. They meant security against raiders. They represented order, safety, and a distinct cultural identity.
So without walls, a city was completely exposed.
Completely. The people were living in a state of constant vulnerability and public disgrace.
So it's not just that the architecture is damaged. The people themselves are living in the rubble of their own identity. They are undefended.
Exactly. And this translates directly to our current cultural moment. Our modern ruins rarely look like literal smoked-out gates or collapsed stone walls. Often, our brokenness is incredibly quiet.
That's so true.
Agape Community Church actually recently conducted a 2025 community assessment to look at the structural integrity of the surrounding area, and the report was deeply revealing. Beneath the polished green lawn stability of the suburbs, there are massive, quiet crises.
Like what kind of crises?
There is a staggering level of social isolation. People are experiencing severe family and caregiver strain. There's skyrocketing youth anxiety and just a profound baseline spiritual confusion. People are living mere feet away from their neighbors, yet they are not deeply known or structurally supported.
Man, and that circles back to the crack in the wall we talked about at the very beginning.
Yeah.
The real tragedy isn't just that these issues exist, it's the psychology of how we deal with them.
We just adapt.
We do. We
Yeah.
experience this pervasive loneliness, and we just label it modern adulthood. We see our friends collapsing under caregiver strain, and we call it a busy season of life.
Right, we minimize it.
We see the spiritual drift, and we just shrug and say, well, that's the culture today. We develop compassion fatigue. We normalize the rubble so that we just don't have to feel the pain of it.
That is the human struggle in a nutshell. We adjust to the ruins because it takes less energy than fixing them. But the calling of Nehemiah, and really the calling of anyone trying to seriously apprentice under Jesus, is the absolute stubborn refusal to accept that numbness.
So he refuses to walk past the crack.
Exactly. When Nehemiah gets the report, he doesn't just sigh, say, that's unfortunate, and go back to his executive duties.
Yeah.
He lets the burden pierce his armor. He allows himself to be deeply, viscerally disturbed by the hidden pain of his people.
Which brings us to verse 4, and I'll be honest, this is where I really struggle with Nehemiah's methodology.
Yeah.
He is a chief of staff, he is a fixer, he has access to the treasury, the military, the king himself.
He has all the resources.
Right. If I'm in his shoes, my immediate reaction to a crisis is to launch a task force, draft a strategic action plan, and start issuing logistical orders. But Nehemiah does something profoundly counterintuitive.
He stops.
Yes. He says, when I heard these things, I sat down and wept. For some days I mourned and fasted and prayed before the God of heaven.
It is a complete subversion of how we handle crises. What Nehemiah is modeling here is the anatomy of a sanctified burden. Before he attempts any logistical organizing, he does the agonizing work of feeling the weight of the problem.
He sits in the rubble, emotionally.
Yes, he sits down, which is a literal physical interruption of his busy, high-status life. He weeps, allowing his emotions to align with the reality of the brokenness, and then he turns to fasting and praying.
Okay, let's look at the reality of that fasting part, because I'll be real, this concept is tough for modern listeners. In a culture of endless productivity, sitting down to weep already feels like a massive waste of time. But fasting,
It feels very foreign.
it feels like ancient religious theater. Practically speaking, skipping lunch just makes me angry and distracted. How does being distracted by a grumbling stomach actually help me, or anyone, focus on a spiritual burden? If there's a problem in my community, my instinct is to roll up my sleeves and fix it, not skip a meal.
It's a great pushback because we fundamentally misunderstand the mechanism of fasting today. Fasting isn't about performing for God, and it is certainly not about manipulating God by showing him how hungry you are.
Okay, then what is it doing?
Think about the psychology of modern comfort. What do we do the very moment we feel stressed, anxious, or burdened? We look for a dopamine hit. We numb the discomfort.
Oh, totally. We pull out our phones and scroll.
Right, we scroll, we binge a television show, we bury ourselves in productivity, or we go to the pantry and comfort ourselves with food. We have endless escape hatches.
We constantly self-medicate the stress so we don't have to feel it.
Precisely. Fasting is the bodily refusal of distraction. It is a physical, physiological way of saying, I will not comfort myself too quickly. When your stomach growls, it acts as a physical alarm bell.
Interesting.
Instead of silencing that bell with a sandwich, you let it ring. And every time it rings, it brings your mind immediately back to the broken walls. You are literally making physical room in your own body for a spiritual burden.
Wow, that is powerful.
It keeps you acutely awake to the ache of the world, preventing you from escaping back into the comfort of Susa.
That reframes it completely. So the hunger pang is the trigger to remember the pain of the community. It short-circuits our default habit of numbing out. And when you look at it that way, it actually answers our first foundational question about God's character.
It really does. What does it say about God?
Yeah, it reveals that God isn't looking for performative strength. He isn't impressed by our frantic, anxious problem-solving. He is moved by the hidden pain of his people. And he honors a heart that is willing to break over the things that break his heart.
Which perfectly hits our fourth question, too. Is there an example we need to learn from? Nehemiah is giving us the ultimate blueprint. Prayer must precede action.
Right.
Before you can be trusted to fix a community, you have to become the kind of person who can actually carry the emotional and spiritual weight of that community before the Lord. If you rush in to fix people without first weeping for them, you end up treating them like a project rather than a people.
Ouch. Yeah, that is so true. But eventually, Nehemiah's tears and his fasting do turn into words. And when we look at verses 5 through 11, his prayer is fascinating. He doesn't just vent raw, chaotic feeling.
No, his prayer is highly structured, and it is entirely steeped in covenant theology.
I noticed that. He starts by quoting God's own words back to him. He says, God of heaven, the great and awesome God, who keeps his covenant of love with those who love him. Why does he do that? Is he trying to remind God of his own promises, like a lawyer bringing up an old contract?
It's not about reminding a forgetful God. It's about anchoring his own chaotic emotions to God's unchanging history. We have to unpack what a covenant actually was in the ancient Near East.
All right, because we use that word casually today.
Exactly. But back then, it wasn't just a casual promise. It was a binding relational treaty. It is closer to the vows of a marriage than a business contract. So when Nehemiah uses covenant language, he is saying, the world is chaotic, my heart is broken, the walls are in ruins, but your relationship with us is structurally sound.
He anchors his despair in God's historical faithfulness. That makes the next part of his prayer even more striking. After establishing that anchor, he moves into confession. But look at how he words it in verse 6.
It's a very specific wording.
He says, I confess the sins we Israelites, including myself and my father's family, have committed against you. This is where it gets really convicting for me. It is so automatic for us to pray by pointing fingers.
100%.
We pray, God, please fix them. Or we say, God, look at how toxic the culture has become. But Nehemiah is 800 miles away. He's arguably living a very faithful, devout life in a pagan court. He could easily distance himself from the failures of the people in Jerusalem.
He really could.
But instead he says, forgive us. He fully implicates himself in the rubble.
That "we" language is crucial, and it aggressively challenges our modern Western individualism. We love to stand above the fray and diagnose the world's problems from a safe
You
distance.
want to be the critic, not the participant.
Exactly. But Nehemiah understands corporate solidarity. He knows that his identity is inextricably tied to his people. And this connects directly to the concept of kingdom discipleship that Jesus introduces. In Matthew 6.33, Jesus says, to seek first his kingdom and his righteousness.
And a kingdom isn't just a private internal feeling.
Right. A kingdom has a culture. It has a real identity, a heritage. When you decide to follow Jesus, you aren't just adopting a new set of private intellectual beliefs. You are adopted into the family, the nation, and the kingdom of God.
You're part of a new we.
Exactly. You share a heritage with other believers. That means following Jesus is an apprenticeship. It requires real communal practice. You don't get to say, I love Jesus, but I want nothing to do with the messy, broken people in the church.
Which answers our third question. What do we need to believe, obey, or turn away from?
Yes, we have to actively turn away from our default setting, which is that suburban isolation and that frantic need to fix things quickly so we can go back to being comfortable.
And instead, we have to obey by practicing what Agape calls peace through presence.
And peace through presence is not passive. Sometimes we hear the word presence and we think it just means sitting in a room quietly doing nothing. But true presence is a profound action.
What does that look like practically?
It requires slowing down your own life enough to actually notice the cracks in the wall. It requires studying the word deeply, just like Nehemiah did so he could pray God's promises. And it requires apprenticing under Jesus alongside other people.
We can't heal our communities just by throwing programs or money at their pain.
No, we have to offer them our durable, prayerful presence.
It's the difference between sending an email and showing up at the hospital. So Nehemiah's story obviously doesn't end in the prayer room. The rest of the book is a masterclass in logistics, administration, and literally rebuilding those walls brick by brick.
But the entire movement starts here.
Right, on his knees, feeling the weight of the rubble. Which brings us to the application for all of us listening today, answering our fifth question. Who can I talk with or pray for in light of what I've learned? What do we actually do with this?
Well, Pastor Florin has laid out a very specific, practical challenge for everyone engaging with this text. This week, your task is to name one real burden in your community or your family that you have been walking past.
Not a vague global abstraction.
No, a specific crack in the wall right in front of you. Maybe it is your neighbor's intense loneliness. Maybe it is a sibling's caregiver burnout or a coworker's spiritual drift. Identify it. Then, we challenge you to fast and pray over that specific burden this week.
Allow your physical hunger to keep you awake to their ache. Make physical room for it.
And then don't keep it to yourself. Take that burden to your apprenticeship group. Share just one honest sentence about it with a crusted believer. You don't have to have a 10-point plan to solve the crisis.
You don't need to launch a nonprofit tomorrow.
Exactly. You just need to begin by sharing the weight of it.
And if you were listening to this and feeling slightly overwhelmed, maybe you're brand new to Christianity, or maybe you've never fasted a day in your life and the idea is intimidating, please know you aren't doing this alone.
We want to equip you for this.
Yes. Head over to the church website at www.agapechurch.life. You'll find our core beliefs there, but you'll also find a dedicated section called Tools for the Journey. And that includes a really practical step-by-step brochure on how to fast biblically and safely.
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to chew on. We spent a lot of time today talking about Nehemiah's position in Susa. He was living in the apex of ancient luxury, safety, and power.
He had it made.
He did. But here's the spoiler for the rest of the book. Nehemiah doesn't just pray for the ruined city from the comfort of his palace. His prayer eventually compels him to walk away from his high-status job, leave the security of the empire, and travel 800 miles to literally get his hands dirty in the rubble.
Wow. He leaves the palace to live in the dirt.
Exactly. And that is the ultimate trajectory of a sanctified burden. It eventually moves you out of your comfort zone. So the question we have to ask ourselves as we apprentice under Jesus is this: what does leaving the palace look like in your life?
Where is God calling you to step out of your carefully curated, comfortable suburban routine and step into the messy, beautiful work of rebuilding alongside someone else?
That's the real challenge.
That is the perfect question to carry into your week. What does leaving the palace look like for you? Thank you so much for giving us your time today. Thank you for hitting pause and reading the Word with us. Whether you are exploring faith for the very first time or you've been following Jesus for decades, we are so grateful you chose to sit in the rubble with us today to learn what it means to rebuild. You are deeply valued in this community. Keep your eyes open to those cracks in the wall, bring them to God in prayer, and we will see you in your apprenticeship groups.